Welcome. Welcome back, I hope. And thank you for joining this ongoing journey through our lives at this historic time. Interestingly, twice in this last week, two individuals made reference to this time in entirely different ways. One mused on the fact that this is probably one of the five biggest historical events to befall humanity since the last pandemic in 1918. The other individual was a young man of 12 years old who, when I asked him how he and his mom were doing, he said, "Life is life." I laughed with pleasure at the simple wisdom of that declaration. As I reflect on both statements, it seems quite clear to me that there is truth in both. Even as we know and acknowledge the unprecedented historic nature of this era on so many levels, we cannot live a greatest historic moment. We can only live our lives right now, right here, in the reality of our day to day. That reality has coincided to a remarkable degree in this last year plus with the historic currents of a pandemic and its restrictions, requirements, and repercussions. It also seems to me that possibly because of our sense of isolation and vulnerability, we felt closer to and more affected by political, social, environmental, criminal, psychological, and even spiritual currents that have touched our lives on an almost daily basis. It has been a complex time of a certain grandeur, hand in hand with an overwhelming intimacy. As I've expressed before, it will take time to sort it all out. But let us pause for a moment with the thought that the grandness comes from the global nature of this pandemic. Grand, not in such a positive way, but in an awe, some way, awe meaning almost fearful. And the intimacy, because we have spent so much time with ourselves and with those who are the very, very closest to us. So let us take that pause and let us take that first breath and feel it filling our bodies from the very tops of our heads, through our throats, into the chest cavity, all the way through our tummies, our legs, down to our toes, which hopefully are planted firmly on the ground. As we are sitting with attentiveness and yet with ease, our hands in our laps, and let us open them to be sure that they are not clenching, to be sure they are not holding on. And hopefully, as we open our hands, other clenchings will follow. As we let go, I hope, of our jaws, our shoulders, the knots in our stomach, perhaps, the tensions in our legs, feet, toes even. You could wiggle your toes just to make sure they're not holding on to the ground for dear life. And let us breathe. Filling every cavity of our bodies with that healing, expansive breath. And let us let it go. I heard someone actually emphasize the exhale this week rather than the inhale. That is, when we exhale completely, We make room for the next breath that comes in. So let us let go of the breath with as much gratitude as we take it in. Because without the exhale, we would not have the pleasure of the fullness, of the expansiveness, of the vitality of our bodies filling with this true breath of life. I think I have shared with you before the thought, I breathe, therefore I am. I think it was Descartes who said, I think, therefore I am. I think there is something even more basic than that. I breathe, therefore I am. With each breath, you might say, thank you. You might say, I am here. I am here right now in this place. Nothing else matters in this moment. Not what I did before, not what I will be doing after. I breathe. Now. As part of my own navigation through the ups and downs and winding roads of this time, certain themes struck me this week that I would share with you in the hope that you might find one or more of them helpful. I was actually reminded this weekend of a passage in our Torah that is one of my favorites because it is used so often, or ideas just like it, to discount our faith. Let me explain. At the end of the book of Leviticus, there is a passage in which God states very clearly that if the Israelites follow God's laws and walk in God's ways, then blessings will abound in their lives. Blessings of work, of home and family, of peace and prosperity. On the other hand, if they reject what God wants of us, if they engage in violence and corruption, if they turn away from goodness and righteousness, then they will bring down upon themselves only curses and the very harm, misery, and pain they have pursued. It is a quid pro quo formulation of good and evil in the world. What draws me to this section is the seemingly naive, primitive, even simplistic, and clearly erroneous view it proposes. I am quite sure that even in ancient times when this passage was written, our ancestors knew very well and from experience that the good frequently suffer and the scoundrels, criminals, and crooks too often seem to prosper. What then were they trying to say or to convey? I believe we have in this passage an articulation of the way our ancestors wanted the world to be. In fact, willed the world to be, and even further, believed the world would be if the entire community could understand and internalize the vision of life given to us in the Torah. As such, the passage on blessings and curses is an ethical statement of our highest values and what adherence to the laws, guidance, and direction of the Torah could actually mean in real human and global terms. It is as if we as a people are saying, this is what we know. The God we believe in is the creative power of the universe, is the source of our understanding of good and evil, is the mysterious force that makes redemption possible. The existence that we call God, introduced into the structure of the universe, into the moral structure of the universe, the concepts of human freedom, dignity, integrity, and equality. And if, with all of our human foibles and failings, our weaknesses and shortcomings, we could train ourselves or educate ourselves or even scare ourselves into behaving with absolute moral rectitude. If all of humanity was truly focused in one direction towards goodness and justice, towards righteousness and lives of beauty and meaning, if our energies were not spent trying to stop, mitigate, and clean up after destruction and violence and the devastating effects of narcissism and disrespect for others, if we were all engaged in making real God's vision of creation, then we could bring about a world that is truly very good and that is filled with blessings, not because God wills it, but because we do. And we have made that world come into existence. It is an if-then of epic spiritual proportions. If you follow my laws and faithfully observe my commandments, I will grant you rains in their season. You shall eat your fill of bread and dwell securely in your land. I will grant peace in the land. I will look with favor upon you and make you fertile and multiply you. I will be your God, and you shall be my people. But if you do not obey me and do not observe all these commandments, and then the text continues as it enumerates a multitude of disasters that will follow. As the renowned rabbi, scholar, teacher, and thinker, Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks has articulated in many different ways, when the Jewish people join hands in collective responsibility, they become a formidable force for good. As an interesting corollary to this discussion, there are reports now of and from many individuals who have cultivated a blessing practice during this time. During these many months when so much seemed to be taken away, those of us who remained well, who were safely housed, fed, and were able to maintain social connections technologically, and even those who may have become ill but recovered, began to consciously notice and give thanks for the daily blessings in their lives. These blessings can be as basic as the ability to breathe in and out, which we know very well is foundational to everything else in our lives. They can be blessings of just saying, I appreciate this, upon seeing the sunshine, the rain fall, feeling the heat come on in the house, the hot water of a shower, the first sign of spring flowers. These are what our tradition calls the miracles of every day, which we now see with new eyes and are consciously learning to say thank you. This is a blessing, either quietly to ourselves or out loud. So let us take a pause for another moment and let us breathe. Breathe in the blessing of breathing. Breathe in the blessing of sharing in this reflection via our computers or our phones, our tablets. we can acknowledge that simultaneously with these blessings, we have also known the sense of loss, disruption, sadness, dislocation, fear, anxiety, comfort, worry. We have known so much in this last year. We have lived a great deal, even while we have felt we've hardly lived at all. What acknowledging the blessings does for us, it allows us to engage in gratitude. Acknowledging that we are grateful every time a breath comes into our bodies and every time it leaves. To see the world through a lens of gratitude is something to work at. That's a practice. It doesn't necessarily come naturally or easily. We have to practice it. So the next time something catches us or stops us, or in which we take pleasure, we could just say, I appreciate that, or I am grateful for that, or thank you. And see how often that impulse might come to our minds, to our hearts, to our lips even. I am grateful for this time with you and for the feeling of this sustaining process continuing to animate my body from top to bottom. We exhale fully, letting it all out. Because then the impulse returns to inhale. Finally, this is the 7th and final week of the counting of the Omer. The mystics associated each week of the Omer with a particular spiritual quality, a quality we associate with God and hope to incorporate into our own lives. Those of you who have been doing this with me for the last many weeks know that this has been a theme. Over these 7 weeks, the qualities, the divine qualities, have unfolded in stages, moving successively from that which is purely spiritual to that which is somehow more earthbound. While nothing of God can be said to be tangible or material, in the mystical view of creation, as God's essence moves through its emanations, the qualities we associate with each week evolve from pure spirit to an essence that comes closest to our material world. Thus, the divine quality that animates this week, in Hebrew malchut, means kingdom, as in God's kingdom established here in this world. This is the goal of the ethical structure of good and evil in the universe, to establish God's presence here among us, what we poetically identify as God's kingdom. This kingdom is further associated, according to the mystics, with divine speech, and thus we are tasked with the spiritual value of Shmirat HaDibur, exercising mindful speech. Our tradition understands well that words can emerge from our lips that are insensitive, hurtful, or mean. Frequently, because we fail to notice or to control our feelings of anger, disappointment, shame, or fear, or any of a variety of feelings or circumstances that allow us to speak words that should not be uttered, and that we often regret later on. As God used speech to create and to ennoble, to beautify and to uplift, so we are to guard our speech and help to establish God's kingdom through the sensitive, compassionate, thoughtful, generous, and loving use of our words. As Rabbi Sam Finesmith expresses so beautifully, by bringing mindful awareness to the inner phenomena that animate our speech, perceptions, biases, assumptions, judgments, intentions, impulses, thought patterns, feelings, and sensations, we unify our inner and outer life and create the conditions for our speech to become Lashon Kodesh, holy speech. When trained through the channels of the other 6 sfirot, the other 6 emanations of God, our speech expresses our nobility, flowing from the boundless font of loving connection, tempered by the cooling waters of restraint, balanced in the middle stream of humility, energized by the tide of alacrity, opened by the flush of gratitude, and empowered by a forward flow toward what's right and good. This week, we will develop our ability to exercise mindful speech, attending to the inner dimensions of our being that animate our words. And as we prepare to receive the Torah on Shavuot, that is coming on Sunday evening and Monday actually, may we utter words that are both noble and ennobling, making God's loving presence manifest right here on earth. So, as we pray that this will be true for us and for all living beings, let us spend a few more moments being right here, right now, aware that we have within each of us a potential to be part of God's kingdom, to be part of something better. We can do that. Each of us. We can do this. And so we breathe in a sense of possibility, a sense of direction, a sense of purpose even. These weeks between Pesach and Shavuot have shown us over and over again how we can be more like what we believe God to be. Or, if the concept of God is difficult, we can be more like the qualities that animate our universe. And that we can access in our own ways, in our own lives, and certainly in our own actions. I hope you will continue to just breathe and luxuriate in it. And remember to do it again tomorrow, even just 1 or 2 or 3 deep breaths. It's so helpful. It is restorative and it is re-energizing. But to conclude our time together today, I found a poem by John O'Donohue entitled, "For One Who is Exhausted, a Blessing." It resonated because among all of the recollections and the thoughts about this time, there's been a certain amount written about how exhausted people are, and especially women. So if this is helpful, it does relate to our theme of blessings today. And in fact, in England, where it was published, it is entitled Benedictus. When the rhythm of the heart becomes hectic, time takes on the strain until it breaks. Then all the unattended stress falls in on the mind like an endless, increasing weight. The light in the mind becomes dim. Things you could take in your stride before now become laborsome events of will. Weariness invades your spirit. Gravity begins falling inside you, dragging down every bone. The tide you never valued has gone out, and you are marooned on unsure ground. Something within you has closed down, and you cannot push yourself back to life. You have been forced to enter empty time. The desire that drove you has relinquished. There is nothing else to do now but rest and patiently learn to receive the self you have forsaken in the race of days. At first, your thinking will darken and sadness take over like listless weather. The flow of unwept tears will frighten you. You have traveled too fast over false ground. Now your soul has come to take you back. Take refuge in your senses. Open up to all the small miracles you rushed through. Become inclined to watch the way of rain when it falls slow and free. Imitate the habit of twilight, taking time to open the well of color that fostered the brightness of day. Draw alongside the silence of stone until its calmness can claim you. Be excessively gentle with yourself. Stay clear of those vexed in spirit. Learn to linger around someone of ease who feels they have all the time in the world. Gradually, you will return to yourself, having learned a new respect for your heart and the joy that dwells far within slow time. And the joy that dwells far within slow time. May we all return to ourselves this week, having learned a new respect for our hearts and the joy that dwells within slow time. I will see you next week. God bless. Take care.